Why, hello. So, what do you think? What do you think? We're going to Scotland, so I am wearing Stuart tartan. Stuart tartan. Actually, before we go to Scotland, before we talk to our book, I must tell you a little bit about my dress. I am wearing what must be considered, given the style and that I am dressed of mid 18th century, I am wearing an illegal dress. Now, let me explain this. This is Royal Stuart. Okay, so this particular tartan is Royal Stuart. This tartan was invented for George IV and his tour of Scotland. He was one of the first, I think he may have been the first Georgian king to actually go to Scotland, the only Georgian king to go to Scotland. Being Stuart tartan, because the Stuarts are the kings, the monarchs of Scotland, they're the ruling family of Scotland, this is also an incredibly seditious dress. Now, I am wearing Royal Stuart. Our great queen, Her Infernal Majesty, wears the Black Stuart, as can be only assumed with her. But tartan has a really unusual history. This is both the king's tartan, but tartan is also as the king's tartan, it is very conservative and very much establishment, and we think of tartan in that way. But tartan is also extremely rebellious, which is why you see tartan and punk together, which is why Her Infernal Majesty wears tartan. So you see tartan on Doc Martens, you see tartan associated with punk culture. Tartan is also incredibly rebellious because tartan comes from the Scottish Highlands. Tartans, as we know them today, attached to particular clans, is a 19th century invention. What would happen is that people would go in, a person with a particular name, say a McDonald, would go into a tartan shop and they would pick a tartan that they liked, and then when anyone else went in there with the name McDonald, they would be shown, this is the McDonald tartan. And so tartans became, and people started to rush to choose, clan heads started to, pick tartans for themselves. And so you have this association of tartans with specific clans. But traditionally, Highland tartan was just what Highlanders wore. It was the decoration that they put into their cloth was tartan, and it was widely worn in the Highlands until the mid 18th century. Bonnie Prince Charlie had fought and lost the Battle of Culloden, when in an attempt to retake the Scottish crown after the Act of Union in 1707 had joined the Scotland with England, which was under Queen Anne, who was a Stuart queen. But then you have the Hanover kings coming in, the Georgian kings, not Scottish. So the Stuarts, having lost position as in England, Bonnie Prince Charlie is attempting to get back his throne in Scotland that has been lost through this Act of Union. And so in an effort to curry favour with the Highland clans, who he were going to use, because Highland clans were very much used as military forces. The English used them. They used them in Canada. They used them all over the place. In order to curry favour with the Highland clans, who he were going to use as his army to reclaim the throne, he came ashore in Scotland wearing a suit, an 18th century suit made entirely out of tartan. It is still available in a museum. It's preserved in a museum. I will put a link down below to Bonnie Prince Charlie's tartan suit. But because tartan was so incredibly tied to Highland Scottish identity, after the defeat of Bonnie Prince Charlie in the Battle of Culloden, the owning of tartan was forbidden. It was outlawed. It was illegal. You could not wear it. It was a way of breaking Highland culture, breaking this culture that had remained and was quite separate from Southern Scottish culture. And so this great expression of Highland culture was suppressed massively. So in wearing a tartan dress, I put my political colours on the mast as a Jacobin. So, yes, my great Scottish dress for my great tour of Scotland. So, there is a little bit about why this is an incredibly rebellious dress to wear. You thought I was just being incredibly conservative, didn't you? No. No, this is a highly, highly rebellious dress. To wear this dress in this style puts you politically as a Jacobin, puts you politically against the King of England. Haven't worn this wig for a while. It's a little bit flowery. So, that's a bit of background. So Scotland for much of the 18th century is this wild, potentially rebellious, dangerous time. We are having a look at today's novel. This month's novel is The Bride of Lammermoor by Sir Walter Scott. Now, Sir Walter Scott was born in 1770, but The Bride of Lammermoor doesn't date until 1811? No, 18... I know the final version was 1830. I think it might be 1819. So it's a later Georgian period book. It's also a period where we start to romanticize Scotland. Scotland is starting to be romanticized. It has been tamed. The Scots are not going to rise up again. So it has been tamed, and having been tamed, it is now free to be romanticized in a way that it hadn't been before. And so The Bride of Lammermoor gives us Scottish Wedding, 3 dead. Well, 2 dead. It was an immensely popular book, and remember a couple of the French ones I said, and the German one came from operas. This is another book that came from the opera, and it came from Donizetti's Lucida Lammermoor, which is Scottish Wedding, 3 dead. Just beautiful, beautiful opera. If you like bel canto opera, it is absolutely exquisite. Has the finest mad scene. Bel canto opera had a lot of mad scenes. This is the best mad scene. This is the mad scene to match all other mad scenes against. But it was an immensely popular book, The Bride of Lammermoor. The fact that it was made into a mass hit opera, the fact that we actually remember the opera more than we remember the book is, sort of testament to its longevity as a story. It's incredibly romantic. It tells the story of Edgar Ravenswood and Lucy Ashton. Edgar Ravenswood is the old aristocracy. The Ashtons are new people coming up. They've got politics behind them, and they have been given the Ravenwood estate. They are new money. They are not the old people. Ravenswood has been exiled from his estate. He hates the Ashtons with a vengeance. So, Scottish Romeo and Juliet we're starting to see here. But he falls in love with Lucy Ashton. Lucy Ashton is sort of a very mild, meek type of girl. She's very easily persuaded. She's very pliant. And she is convinced by her mother that Edgar doesn't love her and breaks her engagement so that they can marry her off to another man, Bucklaw, who will provide them with more wealth and political stability. So this obviously is not going to go down well. This is Scotland, and Ravenswood is the epitome of all those romantic ideas of Scotland, of blood feuds and vengeance and all of those qualities. And so this doesn't end well. Lucy stabs her new husband on their wedding night. She doesn't kill him. She kills him in the opera. She doesn't kill him in the book. She goes mad. In the opera, she has a wonderful big long mad scene. In the book, she hides in a chimney and gibbers like an idiot and never gibbers incoherently and dies. She never gains a voice, but she has had precious little voice for the entire novel anyway. She has basically been put upon by a great many people. And so after her death, Edgar Ravenswood is challenged by her brother to a duel, which he goes to intending more or less to be killed, but disappears into the quicksand along the shoreline. In his haste to get to the duel, he doesn't notice that the quicksand has expanded out, and he sinks and disappears. And so this is incredibly melodramatic. It's huge. It's convoluted. It's got a lot of political stuff in it that, in all honesty, if you want to skip it, you probably could. You could probably skip some of the stuff because it's a little overwritten. But Sir Walter Scott is romanticising Scotland. Scotland is now safe to romanticise, with no longer having its seditious or potentially treasonous past. It is now free to be romanticised. The other reason Sir Walter Scott is really, really, really important, which is why we're doing him, in spite of him being a bit late for us, is Sir Walter Scott is the father of historical fiction. And as historical fiction is a genre that I am particularly interested in, that's why we're doing Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott invents historical fiction. Lucy de Lammermoor, or The Bride of Lammermoor, I know the opera much, much more than the book, and so I am inclined to slip into giving it its Italian title. The Bride of Lammermoor is framed as though it is true, as though this is really what happens up in Scotland. We have these great romantic concepts of Scotland because Walter Scott is framing these stories that he wrote, and he wrote lots of them. He's also wrote Rob Roy, he wrote Ivanhoe, he wrote Waverley. He's written a lot of these stories. He frames them in a very particular historical period, so that they look as though they are real. This could have happened. This is not at some originally it was written at some nebulous time in the past, but by the time he'd finished his revisions, by the 1830s version, he has set it in a very particular period. He's set it in Queen Anne period, and he's done that to give political pressures to the characters. It's not just a random one's gone up and one's gone down, but there are very specific reasons why people's fortunes have travelled the way that they have. But he also gives it an introduction. He gives it an introduction that frames it as though this is a story written from found documents and from research and from legends. So although this is a heavily, heavily constructed narrative, he published his books anonymously. He really pushed the concept. He only owned his books as the author 5 years before his death. So he pushed the idea that these are real happenings in Scotland. He is really creating this incredibly romantic view of Scotland that has persisted. I mean, if you think of Scotland, what do we think of? We think of tartan, and we think of this incredibly romantic feud having wild culture. And this is partly because Sir Walter Scott creates this image for us. He gives this romantic shortbread biscuit box image of Scotland that has persisted to this day. But he also gives us an idea of how we write historical fiction. Is historical fiction history or is it fiction, and how can you blur the lines? He is blurring the lines between history and fiction right at the beginning. This is something that people will come back to, will do repeatedly. They will play with history. It will gain a lot of different variations. But right from the beginning, we are getting this blurring of distinctions, blurring of genres between history on one hand and fiction on the other. And he's bringing these two together. This idea that you can research a story and then tell this story, and what parts are legitimately history and which parts are not legitimately history, these are arguments we still have today over historical novels. Is this legitimate history? Is this not legitimate history? How much of it is legitimate history? How much are you allowed to make up? How much do you have to keep to the real history? These are questions that we still have, and we still talk about, and we still debate. Are you allowed to just yank something out of history and put anachronisms in and then still call it a historical novel? Or do you have to really, really research it? Do you have to really put that effort into making sure that it matches what we know as historical fact? Though, of course, historical fact is historical interpretation. But does it fit with the known facts, the known dates, the known things that we do know about history? Or can you be freer with that? And these are things that he starts out playing with, and we are still continuing to play with. And so that's why Sir Walter Scott is really, really important. Next month, we're going to go back to the Georgian period. We're going to stay in Scotland, so you still get to see some more of my magnificent new dress, my magnificent Scottish dress. But we are going to be going on a tour of the west of Scotland and the Hebrides, the Highlands and the Hebrides, with Boswell and Johnson, because we could not miss out on the Scottish writer Boswell, or have a chance not to encounter the great Dr. Johnson without having to read his dictionary. So we're not reading Dr. Johnson's dictionary, we are reading his journal of travelling the Scottish Highlands with James Boswell. So there will be a link down below, as usual, for the book for next month, and I will see you later up in the Scottish Highlands. Goodbye.
If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books, writing courses and other materials to help with your writing.